Hello, creative ones, and welcome back to Mixed Media Art Fundamentals, where we answer all of your questions about getting started with mixed media art. Now, I'm Michelle Brown with Mixed Media Art, and for over the last 10 years or so, I have been learning, creating, taking classes, and sharing what I've learned with you to hopefully inspire you to start, to try things, to experiment more, and to get to know your materials a lot better. Now, in this episode, we're going to be focusing on the focal point. So we'll be talking about what can we use in the basics. We'll be talking about some basics of composition, and then we'll be talking a little bit about embedding your image into your piece. Now, it doesn't matter what you use, but even though mixed media art, of course, there's no rules, only guidelines that can be completely abstract, but sometimes having a focal point really gives it a focal point. It really gasps our interest. It helps communicate what we're trying to share. Now, this might be an image of a face or a figure. It could be an animal or a creature or a butterfly or a flower or something even more abstract than that. And it could be something that you've drawn yourself, something that you've got from a stamp, a bought image that could be on card or paper, or even could be on tissue or rice paper. So there's so many different places you can find ephemera, and we will definitely put some links and focal points, I should say, definitely put some links near this video so you can find them on the Mixed Media Art website. Now, again, with some of the basics, if you're starting with something that's on card or paper, it's always good to give it a bit of an edge so that that white edge won't show up in your piece. Now, you can do this with some ink or with a marker, and in a couple of episodes, we'll be doing pulling it all together where I'll show you all of these techniques in action. But using the old paper towel technique of taking the edge off it, so when we put it down to embed it, it won't look like it's sitting on top. It can help us embed it in. Now, if your focal point is on rice paper or tissue paper, we can feather that edge by tearing it, perhaps using a bit of water on it on a wet brush that can help tear it and feather it, and that can really help layer the image down and embed the image to make it look like it's part of our piece, not just sitting on top. And of course, we want to make sure that we're adhering it down with a good gel medium. Now, we've already talked about adhesives at a previous episode, so if you missed that one, go back and find out when we ask what glue should we use. And a good gel medium will allow us to put our image down. We've used our waterproof things underneath it so it's not going to smudge. We can put a layer over the top which will help seal, particularly if we are using tissue or rice paper, because then we do want to be able to do layers on it in the upcoming episode. So having a good layer of gel media on the top will help seal that to make it easier to do the shading and the blending in as we go. Now, when we talk about composition, again, there's a few basics that we'll run through before we jump into some examples. So we want to talk about odd numbers. So your basic florist approach, we want 1 or maybe 3. So quite often just having one focal point might be enough depending on the size of your piece. And we'll talk about the rule of thirds as well. So imagining we're dividing our work into thirds, and where those lines cross are sort of power points, are points that grab our attention and are great places to put our image to help it gain some interest, to tell a story, and to make it a cohesive piece. And then I'll give you lots of examples of how we embed this focal point into our piece. And again, this can be one of the tricky things when we're just getting started. We want to look at perhaps, do we need a horizon, particularly if we've got a figure that we know needs somewhere to be grounded. We can create a horizon by using washi tape or by using shading or by using markers. We want to add shading around the image, which helps give it a place. And there's lots of different ways that we can do that. And then if it still is looking like we haven't quite got it integrated, we will talk about how do we take a color from the background and put it into the image, or how do we take a color from the image and put it into the background to make it look more cohesive. You know, sometimes with mixed media, I will start with a focal point and then create a background to match it. But usually I just dive straight in. I'll create a great background and then suddenly go, oh, I need a focal point, find something that's close to it, and then need to do this little bit of magic that I will share with you to make the colors match. So let's jump into a few examples. So like we were saying, there's so many different types of ephemera we can use, and here are just a few examples. So this one is an Art by Marlene paper that we've fussy cutted out. Here is a Vicky P one. I've also used, that one was cut out, but here's a Vicky P one, like a chipboard that comes all pre-cut. You can use a washi sticker. Here I've used a flower. This is a Michelle Logan one by Scrap FX. Here I've used some stamping on some coloured paper using those flowers to create the focal point. Here I've used a chipboard from scrap mats and I've painted that and used that as my focal point. So there's just so many different things that we can use as our focal points. Here's another sticker we've used. This one down here was a stamp that I've then coloured in to match the background. So like I was saying, when we go and put these down, like seeing the chipboard's a really good example. I've added some colour around that so that it's not going to really stand out. And like I said, particularly if you've got something a bit thicker or something like this ephemera, it's really hard to tell, but I have just put a really light layer of the sepia ink around it to take the whiteness off the edge because that makes it easier for us to blend. So like we said, there's so many different ways we can use and find our focal point, but all of them we want to glue down with a good gel medium and then get that layer on top to help seal it. Now, when we talked about composition, like I said, there's a few different things we talked about. One of the tools I use to help is I've got a piece of cereal plastic and I've put a grid on it. Now, if I lay that across the top of this piece, let me move it so you can see. You can see that I've popped the lady on this third. Now, I haven't, sometimes we might like, and these, like I said, are thirds with our PowerPoints, and I've put the lady here and I've popped her flowers here. Now, putting her eyes there didn't quite look as good. And when we do our bringing it all together, we'll talk about how we audition the piece and try it in different locations. We might take a photo of it, we'll think about it for a while, but using those third lines can be really powerful. So here I've put it in this bottom third and created a horizon. Again, down here, if you imagine it into thirds, putting it in that bottom third. This one's a little bit different, but using sort of that top, not quite in the middle, but a little bit above it. Here's another example where we've used that third, and again, those power lines here where her face is, so bringing her eyes to that point. This one with the horizon on the bottom third. This one, because it's something that flies, we can put our point up here to have it up in the air. Again, on this little book, bottom third, image at that point. So like you can see, once you've seen a few examples, you can see that once you find a tried and true approach, it's something I tend to use. Now, the other thing is when you're doing a double page, you can actually consider the thirds across the page. So putting it at that point. And then, of course, this was big enough that I could ground it down the bottom. So you can really consider the thirds across the two pages and not just one. And then similarly with this one, looking at the two pages and the thirds and then putting the mouse's eye up there at that point. So that's a little bit about composition. Now again, some examples of how we've embedded it. So we edged this. We've given her her horizon because she's standing, she's got shoes on. Then the other thing we've done is edged it and given it a bit of a shadow. This was done with a water-soluble pencil. You could use a water-soluble crayon or a pencil, something that you could smudge. The Faber-Castell pens are great because you can smudge them as well. So you can see there how we've created that to really help embed it. And again, I think this shading is really what takes our craft into the art territory. So again, you can see here, once you know what you're looking for, it's a little bit easier to see. And sometimes I'll make it a little bit darker. Sometimes when you do it for the first time, it looks really dark. Here I've also then gone around it with a black marker to help make the image look a bit more cohesive. What else? Where is another example? So again, and this one, I've got stamping in the background, lots of collage, and then this one I've highlighted as well. And this one I've gone around with a pen. So there's different ways you can do it to just help lift that image off the background. And again, this one, we've created the horizon through the background, through the shading. And then I've used some shading around her, and then as well as an outline to help her look like that's where she belongs. This one was a little bit different because it was in the sky. I didn't want to create a dark shadow, so I've actually created a blue shadow and put a little bit of blue shading there. and then put a bit of sepia ink here, again, just to separate it from the white background. I didn't need the sky to come all the way down, but I wanted to just have something here so that we could see the contrast. And again, we're not trying to make it look realistic, we're just trying to make our image look like it's part of the overall piece. And then this one, again, putting some shading along it to help give it a place on the piece. Looks like it's actually sitting somewhere. So that's talking about where we get our images from, about where we put them as far as composition goes, and how we can embed them. Another way of embedding them is to making sure our colours look cohesive. So like I said, I'm not always the best at picking an image and then creating a background. So here I already had most of the background. And this one wasn't quite the right colour palette. So what I've done is taken some of this marker that was green here and then using it on the leaves to make sure that the colours matched. And then likewise with the pinks, taking some of the pinks I've used, and then the cream, which was actually here on the white background. Now again, when you do this, it's really important to understand your paints, because if it's going to be opaque or not see-through, you're going to lose some of that beautiful layering in your image. But here I could already see that this cream was see-through, so it made it easy for me to, just with my finger or a fine brush, pop a bit on here, then knowing I've got the colour from the background in the image. And then likewise with this one, so this started off as a very red orange background, but using my little mouse, I could see she had all this greeny blue on her. So I've taken that colour and popped it into the background, and then again used a little bit of that back here to make it the same colours, to really make it look cohesive. And again, it took what was fairly boring background into something that was interesting because the colours match and our eyes will pick up where the colours come together. Similarly for this one, had quite a pink and orange background, and then once my little fella went on, even though the purples were a good match, this green and blue needed to be added a little bit into the background as well. And then some of this green stenciling we could add back here to make it look more cohesive. So I hope that's given you some ideas of using focal points in our mixed media art. So there's just so many things to cover when we're talking about focusing on our focal points with mixed media art. As we said, there are no rules, only guidelines. So this is some of the things for you to think about. Perhaps try, work out what you like and what works for you, and then discard the others. So we talked about different ways that we can find focal points. We can use stamps, we can use our own drawings, we can buy images that might be on paper or card, or even rice paper or tissue. And then we want to prepare that. So we might need to edge it if it's got quite a solid white edge, or we might want to feather the edging. So when we adhere it with our favorite gel medium, it really does become part of the piece. By putting that layer of gel medium over the top, it will really help seal it. When we think about composition, we want to think about odd numbers, so 1 image or 3, and then we want to think about dividing our area into thirds. But again, trying a few different places, putting it in a few different areas, taking a photo of it, and it's hard to describe, but somehow there's a point where it just goes, oh, that's it, that looks like the right place, and that's when you know that's where to put it. And then once that gel medium has dried, we then want to help embed the image. So by creating a horizon if it's that sort of image, by putting some shading around it, and then really looking at the colors and making sure we've got something from the image in the background or something from the background in the image, depending on what it looks like. So I would love to answer all of your questions. Pop them in the comments, give us a like, subscribe, share us with your crafty friends, and I really hope that you have some fun with focusing on your focal point. This is Michelle signing off. I hope you have a crafty day.